there is something about our experience of being human that where we naturally turn towards fearing those outside of our tribe, however we define the tribe.
Mm.
And our task, though, is to overcome those primal instincts. Our task is to listen to the elders who have come before us. There is no wisdom tradition. There is no religious tradition that says murder other people, despite the way we interpret documents. Okay. And so I think of, for example, when I'm reaching for the poem right now, when I was writing Reunion, the Buddhist teacher and poet Bell Hooks passed away. And I started rereading her work, and I came across this poem. And it's from a collection of poems by the same title of this book, this poem. She wrote, "When angels speak of love, they tell us all is union and reunion. When angels speak of love, they tell us all is union and reunion. Dying, reborn again, there is no separation, no end to paradise. We are always present, the ecstatic moving us along each current, each wilderness of spirit, a dedicated path." Bell Hooks. I think the task is for us to listen to angels speak of love. I think we forget again and again and again that what we are supposed to do is listen for the angels speaking of love, because they tell us that all things are union and reunion. And there's this hopelessness that can set in, a nihilism that can set in. Okay, so I listened and I loved, and yet babies are still shot.
Mm.
Or I listen and I still love, and immigrants are still demonized.
Jerry Colona, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Paul. It's a delight to meet you and to be with you today.
Well, thank you. I dropped you an email. I'm trying to remember when it was, maybe middle to late June, to ask you to come on the podcast. And I got the most interesting auto response to my email that I've ever gotten. And not only was it the most interesting, but I also felt it was the most revealing from a man who was once a high-flying venture capitalist and left that all behind to coach leaders and executives at a very, very deep level. I thought this was really, really interesting. Do I have your permission to read some of it out?
Sure, I'd be
Sure.
happy to.
Cool. So I won't read. So it starts with a poem, and then it says this. So all you leaders listening to this, pay close attention to what this auto response says. It says, "Every summer for nearly 2 decades, I've stepped away from the rhythm of work to remember what matters most. I pause, I rest, I listen. This practice, my annual sabbatical, isn't a retreat from life, but a return to it. I'll be slower to respond to my email during this time. I may reply eventually, but I may not." I like that part. That too was part of the rhythm. Thankfully, you responded to my email. If you're reading this and feeling the humming, the hustle, the quiet invitation to go slower, to go inward, consider this a gentle nudge. Permission even to tend to what's often ignored. I'll see you in September. Warmly, Jerry. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Well, since you're doing that, I'm going to read the poem, even though you skipped it.
I did, yes, but you read the poem. It suits your voice better.
Yeah. So the poem is by Wendell Berry. The best reward in going to the woods is peace. The best reward in going to the woods is peace. A place where everything is as it ought to be, and where one is free to be what one is. The world cannot be better than it is there. The mind comes to rest, is not in aimless wandering or in purpose, but in standing still, where it all becomes clear. Wendell Berry, Sabbath Poem, number 6, 1982.
It's beautiful. It could have been written in any century because the words are timeless. I also think when we're both long gone, no matter how much the world changes, the message there will be timeless. So when I when I got your automatic reply, to me it was it was revealing and interesting because it made me wonder. It made me wonder about your journey from a New York venture capitalist to the life you live today, author, speaker, and very much, as I understand it, working with executives and CEOs to follow an inward journey. How does a venture capitalist, a partner in JP Morgan, end up being the man who puts this as his response to his email? What was that road?
Well, first thing I will say is I take great joy and pleasure in crafting those out of office responses. As you can tell, it's kind of a delight for me to send a message. And the trouble is every year I have to outdo myself. So it's really difficult. What occurs to me, Paul, in response to your question is similar to the message in the out of office response, in that the premise behind your question is that I was once this person and now I've become this other person. I was once this high-flying VC whom New York Magazine once called a Prince of New York. And now I'm this other person who reads poetry. And the truth is, it's not difference, it's a return. See, if we go back in time, when I worked at JP Morgan, which was the last venture firm that I worked at, prior to that, I had founded 2 different Flatirons with a guy named Fred Wilson. We founded that in 1996. It was a true expression of who I am, but it was an inadequate expression of who I am. It was only a part of who I am. And it, like for a lot of people, that person became dominant to the point where the fuller me, the poetry reading me, was dying. And at the risk of being overly dramatic, I had grown up with a profound relationship with depression. As I detailed in my first book, Reboot, I grew up with really challenged, with a challenged childhood. And so one of my adaptations in the world was this kind of splitting into this sort of outwardly good person, but inwardly challenged and hurting person. And then periodically it would erupt, and probably most notably was when I was 18, and the depressive feelings boiled over into suicidal actions, which thankfully failed. And then in my late 30s, that dreadful combination came back. And so, just as I wrote in that away message that this is not a stepping away from or a retreat from life, but a stepping back into, in a sense, I take pure delight in you focusing on this, because what you're really doing is focusing on the part of me that I would cherish the most, the part of me that can go to the woods to find peace. And so, in telling that story, how did I move from that place to this other place? It was a movement back to what matters most to me. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up and let you talk. What's important about starting, here we are, September 1, so I'm back, it's September. What's important about starting with the sabbatical is the realization that this is something that I actually have to return to again and again and again and again. And that's not a bad thing. That's just returning to life. It's returning to breath again and again and again and again.
It's almost like our engagement in life distracts us from this connection with ourselves, and therefore it's this tug of war, for want of a better expression. But I always make the assumption, and maybe it's just what works for me, that if that tug of war exists, then that's the natural state of the universe. That is the play, and I shouldn't struggle against it. But it reminds me of during the summer, we were out for dinner with some friends, and this lady is a very successful business lady, and she's building a new business that could be very, very big for her. And I've been 40 years in business, and we're having a conversation about business, and more so these days, maybe I'm getting older, I'm less interested in talking about business, and I'm more interested in talking about what life is really about for me. And so she said to me, what do you really want, Paul? She meant, like, what's business plans or growth plans? And I gave her the only honest answer I could give, and I said, I want peace. Because, and even now, as I reflect on that, I have to. I have to eat. I have to live. We joked earlier about traveling from Dublin to New York together, and both said, "Well, that was okay as long as we were in first class." So we all want these things. I don't deny them, but the returning or the discovery maybe is that without peace, they're meaningless and worthless.
Yeah, I think that, I'm with you, my friend. The word that I use is equanimity, which to me has a deeper resonance than even the word peace, in the sense that I think the turbulence of the world is also a naturally occurring state. I see symbols of Buddhism behind you, so you'll recognize the bittersweetness of impermanence, for example, which can create turbulence, or attachment, which can create and feed that turbulence. What I yearn for is the ability to coexist with that turbulence and be able to come back to a peaceful state. And that's how I would define equanimity. It's that coming back to. And in a sense, as we've been saying before, it's the return to self that I find really intriguing. Because, like you, I live in a real world where bills need to be paid, and the electric company doesn't take wishes. in order to pay for electricity, right? They need cold hard cash, and we live in an economy. But I don't want to be dictated to by those external factors. I don't want my sense of self-worth being attached to whether or not my business succeeds. I want to enjoy the endeavor of working, the puzzle making or the puzzle solving of building a business. But I don't want to have my equanimity disturbed by that experience. I want to be able to come back to what matters most.
Isn't the nature of equanimity, though, that it will be continually disturbed and challenged? And the practice is to remain in that centered place in spite of, but it will always be challenged. At least that's my experience. It's always
I think it's always challenged, but I think there's a very subtle point here. Again, I wrote about this in Reboot. Milarepa, the great Buddhist saint and teacher, has a song about the inability to separate the waves from the ocean or the wind from the sky, and that they're all actually part of the same experience. And we have to be careful because we do live in a world that wants to encourage us to see the turbulence as a problem that needs to be resolved. We're so oriented to resolution and elimination of discomfort that what I find is how do we ride that wave and not end up drowning in the ocean? How do we exist when, trigger warning, I'm about to curse, I'm from Brooklyn. The world is a shit show. It's a shit show right now. How do we recognize that the world is a shit show and that some 50, 60, 70% of the world feels at threat right now because of our lack of political leadership, because of the challenges, war, famine, climate change, a rise of authoritarianism? All of that is threatening us. And how do we hold on to the fact that the mountains are still beautiful and that both experiences exist? How do we hold ourselves steady, even as we allow ourselves to feel the fear, to feel the turbulence, not to grip ourselves even further and deny that it's existing? Because it's in the feeling of that we empathetically connect with the rest of the world.
2 days ago, I went up to visit my father, as I do every week, and he's 88 years of age, and
God
he
bless
is
him.
he's an incredible physical, mental shape for an 88-year-old man. He really is. But still, as I left him, I felt a tinge of sadness for his evident aging. As I say, he's remarkable for 88, but I can see I can see him. I can see him aging before me, but I also felt a sadness because that was once my home, was where I lived. 35 years ago, or whatever it was, and but the sadness was for him because then it would have been a very full home with my mother, who passed away 15 years ago, with three children. One could say he's very fortunate. His three children still speak to him and live close to him and visit him and all these sort of good things, and he's well and he lives a good life. But I felt a sadness for loneliness or whatever it was. But as I drove away in my car, um, I I just gave myself permission to feel it
Mhm.
because, and I say I gave myself permission, my instinct was, and that's the why I'm
Mhm.
stating this, because my instinct was not to feel it, to distract myself from that sense of sadness, to, I don't know, switch on the music. My instinct was, even after all these years of practice of meditation, my instinct was do not to feel this. And I just said, I kind of just said, no, I need to let myself drop into this experience because it had a bitter sweetness to it. The
Mhm.
sweetness of going, end of the day, he has had an amazing life. He's been successful. He's raised a beautiful family, very, very happy marriage, all of these things. But the impermanence, it inevitably comes to an end, and there's sadness with that. Um, but that's not easy. At least I say it's not easy. Obviously, I'm speaking for myself, but I imagine it's not easy for most people to feel those moments that are inevitable. And I suppose also I'm aware maybe I will be there myself someday.
Well, first of all, when you started to speak and tell this story, one of the things that occurred to me was to recall the bittersweetness of impermanence. And that's what you're speaking to. And what I really admire is that you allowed yourself to experience the totality of it. The exquisite bitterness um, exists because of the sweetness, because you had a chance to sit with your father. And so I actually think that allowing yourself to experience the fullness of that experience is what I would refer to as the joy of impermanence. Now, let me explain what I mean. A few months back, one of my dearest teachers, Parker Palmer, and I were invited to be in conversation on a podcast called The Courageous Life by a good mutual friend named Joshua Steinfeld. And it didn't quite happen this way, but the way I remember it was Joshua just said to these two old guys, Jerry and Parker, impermanence. And we just started talking. And I mentioned all that you had just said and ended up with the joy of impermanence.
Mm.
And what I was talking about was what you got to in the very end of what you were saying, in which you said, I'm just speaking for myself. I think other people would feel something similar. But I'm going to assure you that everybody feels the bittersweetness of impermanence. And it's in the fact that everyone feels the bittersweetness of impermanence. That's where the joy of impermanence lies. Because those folks who are hearing you tell of that little experience last week, they're doing exactly what I did. They're brought back to a relationship that matters to them. They're feeling both edges of that, the sadness of someone who may have passed and the joy of having been with them. And in feeling the bittersweetness of that impermanence, you gave a gift to me, to everyone else, which is where the joy lies. Because that's what connects us. Watch this for a moment. Your father, back when he was a young man, experienced the bittersweetness of impermanence when his ancestors passed, didn't he?
Of course.
And their ancestors, those ancestors, your ancestors felt that experience. So now, as we just sort of pause and hold on to the tears of that, you get to remember. Perhaps your ancestors survived the famine. Perhaps they walked the famine roads. And you get to feel them. Perhaps they journeyed through the Declaration of Independence. You know, yours, not the American one.
Sure.
And all of that. And notice what you're feeling even in this moment. That's connection. That's reunion. That's what I wrote about in my second book. That sense of connectedness. Perhaps you have an ancestor who went through the diaspora, maybe was transported. And all of a sudden, you're now connected to literally millions of kinfolk around the world because you didn't switch on the radio. You felt what you felt.
I think with two thoughts strike me as you're saying that. And yes, probably in having this discussion, somebody may listen to it and connect with it, as you say, because it connects them with their own feelings. But no doubt the awareness that came to me in that moment is because I heard it from someone else at some stage, in teaching or listening or whatever. I've heard probably on many occasions how to be with that moment. And so I was able to, so we passed that gift on to those listening. But the other thing that strikes me is when you have that feeling, because you then recognize that every human being has the same experience if they're willing to acknowledge it. For me, it brings with it a sense of connection, certainly, but a desire for kindness, because you know that no matter who you're standing in front of, no matter what their expression, no matter what they say to you, no matter what the situation is, you know ultimately we are connected by this life that is both beautiful and challenging. And for me, that encourages kindness.
I mean, that is the thesis of my second book, right there, right in there. You know, the subplot is, among other things, I journey back to Ireland. My father found out when he was 21 that he had been adopted by an Italian-American couple. His biological mother, his birth mother, was an Irish immigrant to New York. And in 2022, I visited her grave. And as I said at the time, I walked amongst the bones of my kinfolk. And it's in the leaning into the bitterness that I had to experience, because it was hard to imagine not only the grandmother I knew, who in a fit of anger hurled the fact that my father had been adopted at him on his wedding day. She was so angry at him for marrying my mother. She told him that you're not my son. But the bitterness that I felt towards the woman who had given up my father at 18 months old, and the realization that by embracing those complicated sets of feelings, all of a sudden I could see a young, scared 20-year-old immigrant in New York not knowing what to do. I could see her as kinfolk. And through that experience, imagine in this sort of heart-opening bodhicitta way, all of the people who are struggling. Imagining, for example, an immigrant mother from Guatemala trying to make her way, legally or not, across the southern border of the United States, and realize a connectedness in that experience, as you put it so well, the entirety of the experience of being human, of wanting a better life for a child, of sacrificing things, of taking on the pain of giving up a child. That's not an easy task to do. Uh, 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 and wow, doesn't that bind us all together? Makes it really, really hard to dehumanize someone when you see them as kinfolk. Even though there are so many forces at play right now that would have us systemically other and demonize another person for who they love, for how they worship, for whether or not they worship. For Christ's sake, for their humanity, they are othered.
You talk a lot about radical self-inquiry, and it makes me think that the more we, well, maybe you can explain for people what radical self-inquiry is, but what it makes me think is the more we do that self-inquiry and we look into our own heart, soul, whatever you want to call it, as you say, it's very, I won't say it's very difficult. You become less inclined to feel that separation from other people, because the more you look inside and see yourself, the more you realize that you're the same as everyone else. No matter
You
who they
just
are, no
said
matter
it.
what they look like, no matter what their preferences are.
That's right. To be clear, there are really important differences between us, but those differences don't have to separate us. It's the shared humanity that binds us together. I remember during the worst of the pandemic, having this insight. I was doing a virtual call, a support call, really, with a bunch of entrepreneurs in Mumbai, and everybody gets on the phone, and just, it's like 50 people in a Zoom call. We've all had those little mini boxes, right? And I was talking about the experience of wearing a mask, which, for heaven's sake, was so polarizing, so crazy making. And yet, what I saw in that mask was a symbol of our ability to unite. Because, see, I wear a mask to prevent the spread of a virus that might affect somebody in Mumbai. So I need them to wear a mask so somebody like your father, who might have been challenged, doesn't get sick and die. And what a brilliant notion, what a brilliant symbol of our interdependence and interconnectedness, despite the differences that exist between us. Because we do have different experiences, and those should be celebrated, not cause for segmentation or separation.
But segmentation, separation, violence, war, discrimination, racism, all of these things have always been with us. Maybe we think they're more prevalent. Maybe they are more prevalent now. I don't know, but I seriously doubt it. We're more aware of them now because the news is in our pocket. We carry it everywhere, and we're inundated with this information. But for some reason, it just seems to be the nature of humanity that, as I read history, I don't see how it has changed in thousands of years.
I think that that's absolutely true. I mean, and first of all, you're in your 50s, 60s. How old are you?
I'm 60 next week.
Oh, mazel tov, mazel tov. I'll be 62 this year, so I'm just a tad older.
Just a
So
little.
you grew up in the Troubles,
Absolutely.
okay? So you have a visceral, felt sense for what it's like for people to be murdered for how they worship, all in the name of religion, okay? So you get to speak on this issue, you and your kinfolk. And I think you're right. When I was writing Reunion, I remember there was a chapter. We just had another mass shooting, another school shooting here. I remember writing during the summer. I don't know if you remember. There's so many school shootings in the United States. It's kind of hard to keep them all straight. But this was the shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And I remember writing in the opening of a chapter, they've not yet finished burying the babies in Uvalde, Texas. See, this kind of violence is the natural outgrowth of dehumanization, of systemic othering, of not seeing kinfolk in the other's experience, of not seeing that which binds us together, seeing only the differences, if you will. And leaning into that experience, I think you're right. There is something about our experience of being human that where we naturally turn towards fearing those outside of our tribe, however we define the tribe. And our task, though, is to overcome those primal instincts. Our task is to listen to the elders who have come before us. There is no wisdom tradition. There is no religious tradition that says murder other people, despite the way we interpret documents. Okay. And so I think of, for example, when I'm reaching for the poem right now, when I was writing Reunion, the Buddhist teacher and poet Bell Hooks passed away. And I started rereading her work, and I came across this poem. And it's from a collection of poems by the same title of this book, this poem. She wrote, "When angels speak of love, they tell us all is union and reunion. When angels speak of love, they tell us all is union and reunion. Dying, reborn again, there is no separation, no end to paradise. We are always present, the ecstatic moving us along each current, each wilderness of spirit, a dedicated path." Bell Hooks. I think the task is for us to listen to angels speak of love. I think we forget again and again and again that what we are supposed to do is listen for the angels speaking of love, because they tell us that all things are union and reunion. And there's this hopelessness that can set in, a nihilism that can set in. Okay, so I listened and I loved, and yet babies are still shot. Or I listen and I still love, and immigrants are still demonized. Rabbi Tarfon, one of the great teachers of the rabbinic tradition in Judaism, has this teaching, and he said, "It is not yours to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to ignore the work." And I think implicit in that is, yes, it is the human condition that we fear the other, so much so that we will strive to demonize them and wipe them out. But we have to try to overcome that anyway, because we're not at liberty to neglect the work. We have to do this again and again and again. And the last thing I say, and it all roots back to what you said before, the radical self-inquiry. Who am I? How am I organized? What do I believe to be true about the world? And how does that connect back to that larger question?
And as I go back to that conversation in a restaurant during the summer where my friend said, "What does he want?" And I said, "Peace." And she said to me, "But you already have that." And I can see why that's her perception of me. I've had a meditation practice for 40 years, and maybe she perceives me as a peaceful person. But the reality, and equanimity is maybe a better word, but the reality is, if for me and for it's a to and fro because there's no permanent states.
That's
So
right.
you don't reach a state of peace and go, "I'm here now. That's great.
I'm
That's
done.
it.
I'm
I'm done.
done.
Thank you." Yeah. So you're always working towards it, and I, I almost going back to the very beginning of our conversation, and you spoke. You spoke with this picture I have, or I was painting of you as the you know the Prince of New York, this venture capitalist
Mm.
moving to the individual you are now, and you said it was a return. And the question I wondered then is, I mean, that would be my sense of it entirely. Even as I get older, and hopefully I find more equanimity as I get older, but my sense is I'm returning to myself rather than creating something new. And therefore, I wonder why, if it is our nature, why is it we have to return to what is our nature? That's does that question make sense? Why are we not just
Yeah.
naturally in a place? Because my experience is we all have to make that return in different ways. And why is that the case? I wonder.
Well, and the realization that we have to return again and again means that we're realizing that we lose our our sense of self in our center again and again. And that can be bitter. What's wrong with us? Um, but I turn back to Miller Repper's teaching on separating the waves from the ocean. The existence of the waves serves to remind us of how wonderful the tranquility of the ocean without waves is. We need both.
Mm.
We need to lose ourself so that we can experience the return. Because the return is filled with joy. Now, if we hold a point of view that's a very modern point of view, which is meditation as self-improvement, right? Or meditation as, or radical self-inquiry as a means to enlightenment, right? Why do you have to sit, Paul? You've been meditating for 40 years. Aren't you enlightened yet? Because the process of meditating fills with joy, even as it causes us to be reacquainted with our own maddening mind. Right? It's the process of coming back to the cushion that is where the joy is. So of course we're going to lose it. Because how else would we return?
But also, when you have a practice of meditation, no matter how long you're doing it, well, that's my experience. You sit down, there is, for me anyway, so frequently that struggle. You don't, after decades of doing it, sit down and snap into bliss. At least I don't. Maybe I'm a slow learner. There's frequently you sit down and there is that struggle with the mind. There's that struggle to move, and you, over time, you just get comfortable with noticing that and sitting with that. And maybe that simple practice is teaching us, back to my story of feeling of the sadness leaving my father's home. Maybe it's that is teaching us to lean towards the equanimity, the peace, even when the opposite is present.
I think that's right. And you know, I had a reaction when you were describing that phenomena of sitting down on a cushion and then, you know, finally noticing how monkey mind your mind has been. Oh, just like me.
Yeah.
Paul is just like me. And so there again, there's this opportunity not only to practice the coming back, but to realize there's an opportunity to remember the interconnectedness. Oh, just like every other human being who sits down. I remember when I saw the Dalai Lama speak at Radio City Music Hall in New York years and years ago. And he talked about falling asleep during meditation.
Mm.
I was like, holy crap, just like me.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that cool? So I'm not broken because I have monkey mind. I'm not broken because I fall asleep when I sit down to meditate. I'm human,
Human. Yeah,
just like
I
everybody else.
absolutely. I love when, I mean, I love talking about meditation. I love when you people go, oh yeah, yeah, I tried it a couple of times, but my mind's crazy. I just couldn't quiet it, and I go, you tried a couple of times. I've been trying for 40 years. I still can't. So maybe stick with it a little
Mm.
longer. Or my favorite comeback sometimes is go to people as well. Well, can you play the piano? And they go, no. Well, if you tried 2 or 3 times and failed miserably, what would you think? That you weren't destined to play the piano, and maybe need to practice some more?
Right.
Uh, so, the answer is obvious. I am. I'm wondering. We've spent the last 45 minutes having a conversation, a very philosophical conversation, and as I understand it, a lot of your work, or most of your work, or the work of Reboot, your company, is um, is working with CEOs and executives. Um, how do you bring this? So this is obviously hugely important to you. It's central to the work you do, and I'm just intrigued about how you bring this into the boardroom, how you bring this into the CEO of a very large, successful business. How is it received?
Well, I don't lead with this, right? I lead with the struggles. I lead with the things that they're having challenge with. And um, there's a question I formulated maybe 25 years ago, which is quite famous. It's
Mm,
how have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want, right?
mm,
Complicit, not responsible. How have I helped them along like an accomplice? And the conditions I say I don't want. And that distinction is important because it's not the distinction around it speaks to what I say out loud and what I really feel. Okay. Now, the reason I go to that question is because my colleagues, any good coach will get a client and they'll call you up and they'll say, I'm having trouble with this situation. And when we use a radical self inquiry question like, well, how have you been complicit in creating these conditions? What happens is, I mean, initially, what happens is there's a defensive quality, and then and that moves very quickly into guilt. Oh, you're right. I did this to myself. That's not interesting to me. What's interesting to me is the curiosity. What's interesting to me is how has that mindset, how has that behavior served you? Or to be more specific, what part of you has that served? And what would you like to do about it? So now what you start to see, Paul, is I'm using the same tactics and techniques that you have practiced on the meditation cushion. Oh, let me look at my mind. Let me look at it with some gentleness and maybe even some humor. Let me see the ways I've been complicit in creating this anxiety that just drives me crazy. And we start to apply that in this sort of steady way so that you can then activate the part of the brain that's a little bit more conscious, a little bit more mindful. Oh, I don't want to be feel completely depleted and exhausted all the time? Oh, when I was a kid, I associated being depleted with working because that's what I saw my father go through. I don't want to carry that mindset anymore. Okay, what would you like to replace it with? Oh, well, this. So you see what I'm doing? I start with the thing that they're struggling with and then present these philosophical belief systems that we've been talking about as a possible path to changing the patterns. Because coaching is really about pattern recognition and changing the patterns so that you're in charge, not your unconscious mind.
It's interesting. I was on my bike over the weekend, and not far from where I live in Wicklow, there is an extraordinarily difficult hill to climb. It takes about 8 or 10 minutes to climb it, but you're standing up on your bike, and it's very, 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 very difficult. And I was listening. I can't remember the podcast. Sorry, you were on the podcast. You've been interviewed. I can't remember what the podcast was. But I'm climbing up the hill and listening to you, which is a great distraction as I'm trying to go up the hill. But you ask this question: how am I complicit? And so it was probably a great moment because I'm struggling so much up the hill. My mind doesn't have time to do much other than get me up the hill. And my mind immediately goes back to one of the most difficult times in my business and those difficult times in my life, and the very difficult situation I was in. And so my mind immediately went back and asked myself, how am I complicit? And there was no blame attached to it. But however the question was phrased, and then I began to think, well, how did that serve me being there? I mean,
That's it.
what was I getting from that? And the conclusion I came was that I knew exactly what I got from being there. And at the time, subconsciously, I had valued that more than um, a simpler life, more than the
Mm-hmm.
equanimity and peace. And that's what was going on. I placed a higher value on the success in my business and the financial reward. So I was tolerating stuff, and I was tolerating stuff with me that was destructive to me as a human being. I think you used the word violent, but that was violent to me as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
but was achieving business financial goals. And I thought to myself, and I just realized, well, that's how you want. That's how you ended up there. I managed to get myself out of it, obviously. Um, but I'm not sure actually until I thought about it many, many, many years later that I realized, until that moment when you said that I realized, yeah, but you had a big part in creating that because at some level it was serving some part of you.
Yeah. I love the fact that you did the inquiry without producing the guilt. You did it out of curiosity. And because you weren't in the moment, you were looking backwards, it's probably a little bit easier. But just Friday, I was talking to a client. Even though I was on sabbatical, he was sort of in a really tough state. So we did a call. And he was noting that August is always a miserable time for him. And it was reminiscent or reminding him of his marriage, which had ended, and all of these things. And I said to him, how does it serve you to be miserable? And there was this like startling thing. And I wasn't doing it to be provocative. I was doing it to kick off an inquisition, to kick off an inquiry process. And he started to talk and I said, well, who does it remind you of? And he started to laugh and he said, it's my grandmother. I said, well, one of the things that we do is we maintain a system of thought so that we can maintain a sense of belonging. See, if I let go of being miserable, then I've let go of grandma. And I don't want to let go of grandma. Right? And that's an old pattern. In your case, there may have been something around your definition of work or money Or what does it mean to be an adult male? What does it mean to be a provider? That is associated with depleting oneself or doing self-harm. Or you see, what a good man does is he works his fingers to the bone, literally, right? How many of us grow up with that point of view about work and what work is supposed to be, right? I didn't really try unless I was bleeding. I left it all on the field. So when we talk about the benefit of a belief system, we have to link back to the stories our ancestors told. We have to link back to the stories that shaped us. In Reboot, my first book, the very first chapter is really about my relationship to money and how I use money as a proxy for safety. And so when I was relentlessly pursuing success, which was a placeholder for money, it was really a placeholder for safety. And the irony, of course, is that no matter how much money one has, unless one has done the inner work of peace, you're not going to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
No matter the mountain of gold that you've acquired. How do I know this? Every wisdom tradition tells us this. Even our myths tell us this. But it persists.
I'm a pretty good financial planner. I mean, personally for myself. And so a couple of years ago, I sat down and did a very detailed financial plan that took me up until I was 100 or something. I was very pleased with it. And I review it periodically. So having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I was saying to her how I review this like every quarter or something. And I probably admitted that when I get anyway anxious about money, I pull this out in a review and go, "Hey
Mhm.
man, you're cool, you're fine." And she said to me, Why do you need to do that? Why do you need to do it?" So she asked me this question. I wasn't in a position to answer it. And then and then during the summer, one day I'm sitting in my sauna and I'm at home alone. It's all good, and I have this financial panic attack out of nowhere. I go, "Oh my god!" Now immediately my mind goes to go, "Paul, you've nothing to worry about for the rest of your days." My mind immediately goes to starts pulling. And I caught it. I caught my mind.
Mm.
I caught my mind presenting the portfolio to me, and I said, "But I'm sitting in the heat of the sauna, so it's very physical." And I caught my mind, and I said, "Why don't I just feel this? Why don't I just feel this? What is it
Mm.
like?" So I dropped into the physical experience of what the fear was, and I spent about 15 minutes in a horrendous place of panic, sitting
Mhm.
alone in my sauna, deep. Blah, blah, blah. And after about 15 minutes had passed, I got out, dipped into my cold tub, had a shower, and it was gone and has not returned.
Mm.
So it's like I cleared some, I don't know what it was, but and I maybe her comment triggered something, but because it's back to this, it's back to this ability to feel, isn't it? It's back to this because I was willing to sit with that feeling. The feeling almost took over me and did whatever it had to do, and then
Yeah.
let me go.
Well, like in the car, after leaving your father, you did the counterintuitive thing, which was you leaned into the feeling. And let's give some space to why the panic exists in the first place. Um, is there anything about your lineage on your mother's side or your father's side? Go back as far as you can, where people may have felt safe, but all of a sudden had everything taken away from them. Did any experience of that?
Not that I'm aware of, but certainly there is. I mean, I was brought up being told that, if you think of Ireland in the 60s, there was a sense of a communal sense of poverty. It's a
Right,
very different country now. I know you've been here. Maybe that was in the past.
Right.
10 years or so. But if you'd been here in the 60s, 70s, there was a sense of lack everywhere. So I think I grew up with this idea of scarcity, and then maybe discovered that when if you have that sense of scarcity from your because you've raised in it, then that's entirely separate to the amount of money you actually have or have
Yeah.
not. That's
Absolutely.
they're
It's a
separate things.
it's part of a collective community experience. And in the 1960s, without going into all the details, why might the community have had that? Well, 50, 60 years before that, poverty was. How long has Ireland been in relationship with poverty? How many millennia?
Almost its entire existence up until about 20 years ago or so, I would say.
Okay, so let's give it a little space. This was well earned,
Hmm.
that panic attack. Okay, this is part of a communal experience that goes back millennia.
Hmm. It's in our DNA, is that what you're saying?
It's in the emotional
Yeah,
DNA.
yeah.
It's in the emotional DNA. It's in the collective unconscious. You know, it's. I see it in the children and grandchildren of pogroms.
Yeah.
They never forget.
It just strikes me and an image came to my mind. Um, we where we live, and in Wicklow, I have a book in my sitting room, and there's a lot of grand old houses. Beautiful long driveways and beautiful old houses, and had a conversation with some friends very recently, and we talked about some of these old places, and we said the reality is the people who lived in those were very, very
Mm.
wealthy, but they were not Irish. They were not
No,
Irish.
no, they
They were
were.
British. They were British. So the reality of it is we grew up hundreds of years ago knowing what it was like to have everything taken from us, whether it was ours or whether it was not. Um, Jerry, it's been a wonderful conversation, and I feel like it could go on for hours, but but we can't. We can't do that. Um, well, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. But what would you leave people? What's your parting comment to anyone who has stuck with us for the past hour and listened to the conversation? What's the parting gift you would give them?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't circle back to the tough state of the world right now. And I imagine that there's more than one person who heard your stories, Paul, or my stories, and found resonance in their own life. And I would say take comfort in the resonance of our stories. There's a theme in Reunion that I picked up, which is embodied in the phrase, your story is my story. And that notion that our stories are the same, I take great comfort in that in facing the troubles of the world. So hold on to that, lean into the community. You're not alone.
I think that's the essence of what has emerged from this conversation is that eternal truth that your story is my story, and that's the connectivity between us all. Jerry, reboot.io, I believe, is your website.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone goes there, they can find out all about you. They can find links to your books and your podcast. Because I've no doubt that anyone has stuck with us and enjoyed this podcast will want to dig a little more and find out who on earth is this Jerry Colona, and where can I get more of this? So I would certainly. I mean, I've listened to you in many podcasts, and I would certainly encourage people to dig into it and to listen and to sit with it, to spend some time with it. Jerry, it's been an absolute pleasure and joy to have you in the podcast, and I've loved the conversation. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having me, Paul.